By the end of this lesson, not only are you going to understand the what, how, and the why of the CAGED system, but you're going to be able to start incorporating it into your own guitar playing immediately. Oh, and as usual, be sure to stick around to the very end of the lesson because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar. You're both going to love it. Okay, the CAGED system. Let's get into it. Let's finally explain what it's all about and demystify all of the weird fluff that seems to surround it, especially when it's being talked about on the internet, which of course tends to overcomplicate things. So my mission here is to undercomplicate it and make sure that not only do you understand it as far as what it is, but like how it works, why it's important, and how you can actually start using it in your own playing so that it's relevant and practical to you. So let's start with the what. The CAGED system, if I were to put it as simply as I possibly can, it's a framework of chord tones that involve 5 chord forms or chord shapes, which are the CAGED shapes, and it spans them across your fretboard. And with that, you can actually see that same framework of those chord tones for any major chord. So for example, let's say we wanted to find all of the chord tones over a C chord, right? Simple C chord. So if we started with our C cowboy chord, right here in the open position. Now we're starting with C, that's our chord form. We have the C chord, but it's also the form itself, right? The finger configuration, which if I were to turn it into a movable shape that I could bar, right? Because that's going to be important later, it would look like this, right? But because we have those open strings, we play the open C chord like that, right? And so remember, in CAGED, you have CAGED. That's a specific order, and it's a revolving door of that order. So if we start with C, and we wanted to find the A chord form of C, it would come right after C because CA in CAGED, right? Remember the order, we have A. So if we were to take an A chord form, but adapt it pretty much right where the C chord form leaves off, C, A, right? And if you're looking at this and you're like, that doesn't look like an A chord at all. We play the A chord like this typically, right? In this open position here. But if we were to turn it into a movable bar chord shape, that's what it would look like. So we're moving it way up here so that it can accommodate a C chord. So this is technically a C chord. It's just using the A chord form. Are you getting it? So next up in CAGED, C-A-G, right? We have the G chord form. Let's turn that into a C chord. Starting with the G chord form, right? Know how we know the G chord form like this, right? If we're playing the open G chord. If we were to turn it into a movable chord form, it'd have to look like this, right? So we're bringing it over here. And even though that's a really goofy way to play a C chord, right? That is a C chord. It's just using the G chord form. It would only be a G chord if that root note, right, was G. But we've moved that root note to C. So now this is a C chord. And we'll get into the applications because you may look at this chord and be like, I would never ever play a chord shape like that. And I totally understand why. We'll get into the actual applications of how the CAGED system can be relevant to rhythm and lead guitar playing. But for right now, we're understanding and establishing the framework. So we have C, A, G, all C chords. If you actually listen, you can hear that they're the same chords. They just have some additional notes. They do contain the chord tones. So in a C chord, you really only need 3 chord tones, the root, the third, and the fifth, which we have. So if we were to just go back for a second to the C chord, the open C chord, we have root, third, fifth, then we have another root, and the third. That's what makes up this open C chord. Now if we move it over here to the A chord form, we have root, fifth, there's another root, there's a third, there's another fifth. So all containing the notes necessary to make up a C chord, root, third, and fifth. Let's go even further. Now we have the G chord, or sorry, the C chord, but G chord form. All right, we have root, third, fifth, here's another root, here's another third, here's another root. So it's just variations of essentially those same 3 notes, right? And let's keep it going. What do we have after G? C, A, G, E. So now we're going to take the E chord form. Now you might recognize this. Very common, very popular bar chord shape. You may have already, maybe you already use it, right? Now, this is called the E chord form. Reason being is because, look, if we move it down here to the open position, and then of course adapt it to how we typically like to play it in the open position, but if you turn it into a movable bar chord shape, it would look like this like major bar chord shape that we know and love, right? That is often called the E bar chord shape, and that's why. It's the shape of it. It's the shape of an E chord. But in this case, we're playing, there's a C root note there, and we have our root, fifth, octave, third, fifth, root. We have those chord tones that make up the C chord, and this is a C chord because of that, right? It's starting to sink in. We're almost done. We got D right at the very end. We have C, A, G, E, and then now we have D. And this one is typically the most awkward, turning a D chord shape into a movable shape. But notice how we take that little kind of triangle configuration of our fingers, just like when we play an open D chord. But if we made it into a movable shape, it looks something like this, kind of like a crab claw looking crazy thing. And then we bring it up here to accommodate a C chord. And so what are the notes? We got root, fifth, there's a third, no, that's a root. We have root, fifth, root, there's a third right there. So we have all the necessary components for it to classify as a C chord. And then once we reach here to the 12th fret, it actually starts over, but an octave higher. So we can take that C chord form, A chord form, and keep going until we run out of frets, right? But for right now, just those C, A, G, E, D chord forms, we span pretty much most of the fretboard, right? Just by doing that. And it's all the same 3 notes, just appearing in different positions on the fretboard and in different octaves. So we've covered the what and a little bit of the how. Let's talk a little bit more about the how. Like, how is it actually working? Well, using those chord forms, as you saw, we're able to take a C chord basically and span it across the entire fretboard by virtue of those different chord forms. And they're really ergonomic. They work with our hands, you know, because they all use chord shapes that generally are among the first that you learn when you play guitar, right? When you learn those open position cowboy chords, you know, they all have like new purposes now because we think of the actual form or the shape of them to actually give us more of the same chord. So if you were to tell me, you know, play a C chord, I'd be like, which one? You want this? You want this? You want this? You know, this? I can keep going, right? So you actually have like access to a C chord in more than just the open position. And this works for any major chord. So it doesn't have to be just C. We use C as our starting point, but we can use another chord. Why don't we use G, right? If we were to use the CAGED system to find a bunch of G chords on the fretboard, how would that look? Well, starting with the lowest chord form we could find, if we're thinking in terms of G, it's gonna be the G chord form, the open G that we know and love, right? Now, here's the thing, we're starting on G, and I mentioned before that CAGED, right, is an order, but it's also a revolving door. So if it starts on G, it's no longer caged, it's like gedka. So it's G-E-D, right, the last part of CAGED, and then C-A, it starts over, because again, revolving door. So let's find gedka, right, which is still using the CAGED system. We have G, next would be the E chord form, and each of these chord forms, right, they pick up where the last one left off. So we have that low root note there on the low E string, then we fill it in with the E, right, in gedka. And then next we have the D chord. These are all G chords, by the way. G, G, G. Then after that we have C in gedka, all right? That's a G chord, but it's using the C chord form, right? And then finally we have the A. So we've just used the CAGED system to find a bunch of G chords. G chords that are, you know, starting from the open position, you know, like in the G chord form, and then using the E bar chord, but then we're finding all these different voicings, these different inversions of the G chord, and what that's gonna give us, which we'll explore in a little bit, are a multitude of options to actually play a G chord. So if you say, yeah, I can play a G chord, but it's only this, there's all this extra fretboard here, right? You want to be able to find a G chord anywhere where you're at. Because if you're able to find a chord anywhere on the fretboard, those are the beginning stages of understanding how to play to the chord changes or play over the chord changes. If that's something you've heard before when it comes to soloing, it's like instead of just picking a one-size-fits-all scale, you can actually in real time really dynamically play through a chord progression by covering those chord changes and highlighting them as they're being played, right? Or as you are implying them if you're playing solo by yourself, right? Which we'll get into as well. So one more example, let's do F. So we've gone over a C chord and a G chord, which are commonly used in a chord progression. Let's go over F, which is another commonly used chord in a C chord progression, right? So like for example, if we were to play a C chord, F chord, and a G chord, right? That's a 1-4-5 in the key of C. 1-4-5. So let's take a look here, right? If we're to take the infamous F chord, right? Which is technically an E bar chord, right? Remember we talked about that? It's an E bar chord, same shape. It's just occupying this part of the fretboard. So we have that F chord, we're gonna call it an E bar chord. So let's think about the revolving door. So if we're doing CAGED starting on E, what would we call that? CAG. So it's like goofy word, but this is like, again, like showing you how it's the revolving door thing, right? So we have the E chord. Next up would be D, right? The D chord shape or form. This is still an F chord. Then we have C. And we have A. And then finally, CAG, we got G. And there you have a whole bunch of F chords, just in different inversions, all containing the necessary components, which is 3 notes, root, third, fifth, right? The notes that make up a triad. If you have multiple roots and thirds and fifths in order, then that's how you get arpeggios, like bigger chords, all going through the same notes. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Not only does it really help us out, but it lets us know that you'd like to see more lessons just like this one, which believe me, we'd be more than happy to give you. So thanks in advance, and let's get right back to business. Now we're going to get into the why and the practical applications of the CAGED system. Let's take a look at all 3 of those chords and how they actually can apply if we're using the CAGED system. So obviously, once you have this framework in front of you, it's not like you got to start playing chords like, just like shifting shapes and stuff just to make yourself seem competent as a musician. You want to actually like use it as just a visual roadmap that you always have. So if you're playing over C chord and you want to highlight the notes in that C chord, you'll know exactly where to find all of those chord tones anywhere on the fretboard. So let's say, for example, okay, I'm right here on the fretboard, and you're like, play me a C chord or highlight a C chord. Be like, okay, easy. Right there, that's a C triad. We have a third, fifth, and a root, which, by the way, you don't have to know where the exact root, thirds, and fifths are. You can rest assured that just by playing those chord forms, you're automatically covering that ground. So you don't got to worry about it. That will come later though, right? So that right there is just a fragment of that C. Ooh, hard to play up here, but it's that C chord form, all right? At least when I'm sitting down. So I've just taken a fragment of that and just made up a little C triad. Technically, this would be a C triad in the first inversion, because the lowest note here is a third, right? And if you're wondering what any of that means, we do have other lessons on this channel covering triads. I cover inversions, all that stuff, so that'll be perfectly explained to you. You don't have to understand what that means right at this moment though, okay? But just to show you that, cool, I now have this. So if let's say I'm in a band situation and I'm playing, a C chord, or let's say there's another guitar player, maybe like an acoustic player, who's also singing, let's say, right? Which is often a musical situation I find myself in, right? They're going to be over here holding it down in the cowboy register, right? I don't want to play on top of what they're playing. I want to complement what they're playing. So if they're doing something like this, something like that, I can go, let it ring, just holding it out, just like letting those, taking full advantage of those notes because they're the same notes within the C chord that the acoustic guitarist is playing, right? / singer. And I'm able to complement what they're doing without stepping on their toes, doubling up, playing the same thing. You want to be able to have options and variety. And it doesn't have to be there. It can be here. That sounds pretty. That's a C triad right there. It's a fragment of that E chord form, right? So again, if they're doing this kind of thing, something like that. I can do something like, it's like melodic. I can even take it further up here. This is all the CAGED system is revealing this stuff to me, right? I can even do this. There's another little triad here. And I'm just sticking to just like the D, G, and B strings to find these triads. You know, if you want to find, there's one, there's one, there's one, all these different C chords. And if we're going to throw in other chords in the mix, like an F and a G, let's say we're doing like a 1-5-4 chord progression. So it's like, something like that, right? So C, the 1 chord, G, the 5 chord, and then F, 4 chord, hanging on that. So it's like, let's say now you're tasked with comping, right? As a rhythm guitarist, comping over what, let's say, the acoustic guitar player is doing, playing that C, G, F chord progression, that 1-5-4. So we know that the 1 chord, right, C, if we wanted to, let's say, play triads, like these kind of middle of the road triads here, right, between the D, G, and B strings, right? These are all found with those chord forms, right? It's all there. But instead of playing the whole chord form, right, covering, you know, the entire thing, you don't have to do that. Just take a fragment of it. And if you want to play in triads, it's a great place to start. If we're going to like full-on big arpeggios, you can just start with 3 notes at a time, right? Like we have this triad here, which is a first inversion triad, same as this, by the way, just an octave lower. Then we have this, it's a second inversion triad because the lowest note is the 5th, 5th, root 3rd. And then here we have standard C triad, root 3rd, 5th. And then right here, first inversion, right? 3rd, 5th, root. But we're not going to stop at just C. We got 2 more chords in the progression. So let's find some middle of the road triads for G and F, since we're doing C, G, F as a chord progression. So with G, right, starting with the shapes that we know of, right, we just want to take those middle triads. So we got that first triad, which is just the open D, G, and B strings. And then we have this one right here. Then we got this one right here. And this one right here for G. And then for F, we got this one right here. And then we got this one right here. Notice how these shapes are all similar, right? For F, we got this, this, this. For G, it's the same shapes, just 2 frets up to accommodate G. Just with those and with the C chords, we can actually highlight a 1-5-4 chord progression, or in any order, really. Just we can highlight a C chord, a G chord, and an F chord using those triads. So if we got the singer doing something like this, chord progression like that, we can do something like this. Let's see. Okay, starting with C, we got C, there's G, F, F, right? Then C, G, F, and just we can keep it going. We can do all kinds of things. We can like arpeggiate. We can go like, right? All of those triads are derived from those chord shapes. It's that simple. I'm using the CAGED system, using that framework, using those chord forms, just finding little pockets of them to actually apply this like rhythm guitar example, right? But now let's talk about how we would apply it in a lead guitar context. Okay, so if we were to talk about a lead guitar context, right? Something that would highlight chord tones and therefore allow us to play over chord changes, but we still want to be melodic with it, right? Because if you're just kind of playing chord tones just like kind of the whole way through, you're just kind of arpeggiating the whole time, which is fine. But if you're trying to solo, you want to use scales and stuff too, not just arpeggios. But there's got to be a nice harmony between the two. So instead of only soloing with scales, you can solo with the CAGED system plus scales to add melody and still give you those targeted chord tones. So let me give you an example, okay? If we're in the key of C, we can look at the C major pentatonic, for example, right? 'Cause this is a very happy sounding chord progression, right? Very happy sounding. So we don't need to get too bluesy with it. We can get a little bit more jovial. So a little bit more pop, maybe even a little gospel-y with it. So C major pentatonic, which is the same as A minor pentatonic, same position. All right, so if you were to take the A minor pentatonic, but then focus on the major root notes, being C, right? C, 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 which also, by the way, check it out. The G chord form occupies that same shape, which is why this particular pentatonic scale pattern, also known as the G scale pattern, because it fits that G chord shape. That's the only reason, right? But you can use that in combination with triads to create a really nice sounding solo that plays over chord changes, but is also very melodic at the same time. So get this, right? Instead of just going like, you know, that's all fine and good, but let's say we want to actually highlight the chord changes. We have an F and a G chord to think about, right? So if we're in this position here, we're in this position of the fretboard. Let's find where we can find a G and an F triad. Well, I already can tell you F triad's right here. Like, remember, got F here, F here, F here. There we go. There's an F triad. Now, where's the nearest G triad? Well, there's actually two, but they're both kind of adjacent to the G pattern pentatonic here. So we have this one or that one, and we can use them both. And of course, with C, we got this one. This triad here. So there's our C, there's our F, and then for G, we got two options. Just because they're both equidistant, right, when it comes to this scale pattern here. So let's say I wanted to play a nice melodic solo. So I started in C, right? Did you hear a change there? All right, I was implying C. Ooh, and then I went straight to that. When I played it right, I was hitting those chord tones over an F, and it gave you enough tension to signify that, oh, there's a change happening here. It's a different chord being implied, right? So we were at C. And then for G, you know, we can go as like, you know, starting with the tension of that 5 chord, back resolving to the 1, right? This root note here. Now, but if I were to think more in terms of the actual chord progression, like 1, 5, 4, right? So that would be C, G, F. If I were to solo using the scale, right? The major pentatonic scale here, in addition to the triads, I could do something like this. So I started in C, then implied G, and then brought it down to F, and then there, right, brought it back to C. So if I were to focus strictly on chord tones, like I said, it would just sound very arpeggio-y, which again is fine, but if you want to make it more melodic, you got to kind of weave those triads together with a scale or scales that'll give you some melodic options. And in this case, major pentatonic is a perfect way to go. And once you get comfortable with that strategy of playing over the chord changes, there's a million places you can go. You can do something like, all right, there's 1 to 5, and then there's 4, right? Back to the 1. You can get really melodic with it. So it's just this nice harmonious combination of using a scale or scales with the triads as your targeted notes so that you're playing and implying over those chord changes. Now, the real trick with playing it over chord changes is to make sure that you time it right. So if you're playing in the order of a 1, 5, 4 chord progression, let's say if you're playing over it, whether it's a backing track or a song that you like, right? You gotta make sure that you follow those changes it's gotta reflect in your playing. You gotta be able to hit the chord tones with those changing chords so that you properly nail it. Because if you end up playing chord tones over the wrong chord, you run the risk of sounding dissonant and it just won't sound that good. So there it is, the what, how, and the why of the CAGED system and how it actually applies in a rhythm and lead guitar context. I wanted to frame it as simple as possible, especially with the application side of things, just to show you that you don't need a whole lot, right? You don't have to cover your entire fretboard to properly use the CAGED system. You can use it to create nice, simple melodic lines that imply the chord changes just fine. And we just covered a chord progression in the key of C in this lesson. You can imagine how endless the possibilities would be once you start getting into the other major keys. And speaking of which, if you'd like to learn how to instantly find all of the major keys and all the minor keys on your fretboard, I actually got just the thing that's going to get you there, and it happens to be that free gift that I owe you. And now that you've made it to the end of the lesson, as promised, it's time to reveal it to you. And voila! This is a free lesson on how to instantly solo in any key. It's going to take some of the concepts that we learned today and actually expand them across multiple keys in major and minor, and show you how to cover your fretboard no matter what key you're playing in. It's the most comprehensive and best lesson when it comes to actually finding every key on your fretboard in record time. I promise you, it's great. Definitely check it out, especially because it's yours free. Just be sure to click here, claim your copy, or check that link in the description box. If you ask me, the CAGED system doesn't deserve to be the subject of controversy. It's a very effective method in understanding how to visualize the fretboard, whether you're playing rhythm or lead guitar, and there are enough great guitarists in the world who are living proof that it works.